So today I'm going to do a video about asset protection trusts because there has been a very interesting case out in Asia, which gives us a little bit of an insight into whether they really work or not. So we're going to be looking at a case which involved a Chinese celebrity. It's a lady called Zhang Lan. She's a very famous restaurateur in China, and she sold her business to a Western private equity fund and they didn't like the price. And what we will be looking at today is what happened during the litigation. She had structured her affairs using a asset protection trust, but it didn't work. When I think about asset protection trusts, I think about two things. I think about the enforcement of foreign judgments in a jurisdiction. How easy does that jurisdiction enforce judgments from another jurisdiction? And the second thing that I think about is what is the statute of limitations in the jurisdiction itself? How many years need to elapse before you cannot bring a judgment in that jurisdiction? What are the provisions against creditor actions? So those are the two things that really make up what is known as a sort of asset protection jurisdiction. It's those two elements, the ability to enforce foreign judgments and usually somewhere that has a very short period that a creditor can bring a claim. So the case is known as Zhang Lan versus the Dolce Vita Fine Dining Group Holding Limited. And as we say in law, bad cases make bad law. And this is really an example of this, I think. So Zhang Lan's business was called South Beauty Investment Company Limited, and she sold it to a company called the Dolce Vita Fine Dining Company Limited, which was essentially an investment vehicle for the well-known private equity firm CVC Capital Partners. Around the time she was receiving the purchase funds, she settled a trust, and I have depicted that here on a chart. So you can see on this chart the roles that Zhang played. She was quite involved in the trust. This isn't something that here at Banham Law we would have recommended. She's acting as the director of the underlying company, and she's also an authorized signatory on the bank account. So she actually didn't have any powers under the trust, and she'd used the Cook Islands, the premier asset protection jurisdiction, because of the 1 year limitation period it has for a creditor to bring a claim. But she retained so much control lower down. And what was also very fatal here was that she had the assets themselves in Singapore. Sadly, after the purchase was completed, South Beauty Investment Company Limited suffered a decline in its financial performance. CVC claimed that Zhang had given a number of negligent and fraudulent representations. I mean, perish the thought of a private equity company just getting their numbers wrong, right? Arbitration then occurred in China, and the China International Economic Trade Arbitration Commission awarded in favor of CVC. Interestingly, CVC were able to obtain judgments in Hong Kong, which recognized the Chinese arbitral awards. So again, showing here the importance of jurisdictions, because what they did next was important. It got worse, because those Hong Kong judgments were then successfully registered in Singapore, and CVC then applied to appoint receivers over the bank accounts at Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank in Singapore. Zhang and STETL, the BVI company, appealed in Singapore. However, the court dismissed her claim and held that Zhang herself beneficially owned the assets in the bank accounts and that they were not assets of the trusts. So why did they come to such a decision? This case, it's really a reminder about excessive powers retained by a settlor. If you want to set an asset protection trust up, you're going to have to give away some control. In fact, as much control as you possibly can, and you're going to have to trust the trustee. If you don't, a smart litigator can easily unpack even the cleverest asset protection trust, even if it's in the Cook Islands or elsewhere. And as I always say, there are two key parts to asset protection trusts. It's the enforcement of foreign judgments and the length of time that creditors can bring claims in those jurisdictions. But there's also a third point, and that is what jurisdiction are the assets themselves in? And in this case, Zhang Lan had put them in Singapore. And you can see that the lawyers were clever. They were able to move from China to Hong Kong to Singapore, and they were able to unpack this trust. But there were some other mistakes made that made this much easier for CVC to attack the structure. Transfers had been made without the prior direction or involvement of the trustee. There was some sloppy wording by the lawyer. A solicitor had confirmed to the judge that Zhang had maintained the Deutsche Bank account. Interestingly, there was no actual independent action by the corporate trustee to contend any of the litigations. Zhang Lan herself was the one actually defending the legal attack, and that was cited as a reason that suggested that Zhang was in control. There was a lack of independent action by the trustee. So Zhang actually in this trust had no powers in the trust, and she was not a beneficiary, but she had signatory rights over the bank account. She was the sole director of the underlying BVI company, and really faithfully as well, I think, even though she wasn't a beneficiary, she had received payments without any valid reason, without any prior approval by the trustee. She claimed that they were for the beneficiaries. She was receiving them and then making payments on their behalf. That is always a bad idea. And so in this case, even the Cook Islands Trust, the legal system of the Cook Islands was not enough to protect these assets. So it's a really good example that you need that sort of holy trinity of the assets being placed in the right jurisdiction, the trust law, and the guardian against the enforcement of foreign judgments. So that's that for that video. I'll do more videos touching on asset protection trusts, but this is a really key case and a really good reminder. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and hit like.